thought I'd found the perfect place for a peaceful weekend getaway. The cabin was tucked away deep in the mountains, far from the bustle of everyday life. When I stumbled across the listing on Airbnb, it seemed too good to be true. An isolated, cozy cabin with panoramic views, a fireplace, and a hot tub. It was exactly what I needed after weeks of work, just a place to relax and recharge. The reviews were glowing, and everything about the photos screamed serenity. No neighbors for miles, just nature in all its glory. The kind of place where you could forget about everything else. I arrived just after sunset. The air was crisp, and the long drive up to the cabin had been peaceful. The trees were thick and wild, and the road twisted through the mountains in a way that made me feel like I was entering some secret, hidden part of the world. I was excited, pulling up to the cabin with the soft glow of the headlights illuminating the rustic wooden structure ahead. It looked exactly like the pictures, maybe even better in person, like a place where you could leave everything behind and just breathe. After I parked, I grabbed my bags and walked up the small wooden steps to the door. The key was waiting for me under the doormat, just as promised. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let out a sigh of relief. It was warm inside, the kind of warmth that feels inviting after being out in the cold. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the smell of fresh wood lingered in the air. The living room had a comfortable couch, a couple of armchairs, and a large rustic coffee table. The decor was simple but charming, lots of earthy tones and natural materials, a perfect match for the surrounding wilderness. There were windows everywhere, giving a full view of the mountains, which were already starting to darken as the sun set. I set my bags down in the entryway and took a moment to appreciate the peacefulness. The only sounds were the faint rustling of the trees outside and the occasional chirp of a bird or insect. I felt at ease, the weight of the week already starting to lift off my shoulders. I didn't have any particular plans for the weekend, just wanted to relax and unwind. I explored the cabin a bit, taking in the kitchen, which was well stocked with everything I would need to cook, and the bathroom, which had a massive tub and a walk-in shower. The place was more than I could have asked for. There was even a small bookshelf with a collection of novels, which I thought would be perfect for the quiet nights ahead. I was already picturing myself curled up by the fire with a good book. As I moved through the hallway to the bedroom, I passed a full-length mirror mounted on the wall. It was a simple mirror, nothing fancy, framed in dark wood. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I walked by, I caught a glimpse of something strange. In the reflection just behind me, I saw a shadowy figure. It was tall, slightly hunched, and looked like it was standing right behind me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I whipped around to look, but there was nothing there. No one. The hallway was empty. I blinked a few times, trying to shake off the sudden chill that had crawled up my spine. Maybe it was just the light, I thought, or maybe I'd just imagined it. Great, I muttered to myself. Just your imagination playing tricks. I laughed it off, but the moment stuck with me. I couldn't shake the image of the figure from my mind, but I tried to ignore it. I was alone, after all, and there was no logical reason for me to feel unsettled. Maybe I'd just been too tired after the long drive. I decided to unpack my things and settle in for the night. The kitchen was warm, and the fridge was stocked with a few basics, some eggs, bacon, and a couple of bottles of wine. I made myself a simple dinner and ate by the fire, the warmth of the flames providing a sense of comfort. Still, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the back of my mind, like there was something, or someone, out there in the shadows. After dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down on the couch. I turned on the small TV mounted on the wall and flicked through a few channels, but nothing caught my attention. The flickering light of the television felt wrong in the cabin. It was too artificial, too distant from the peacefulness of the place. I shut it off and just sat in the quiet, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft hum of the night outside. That was when I saw it again. In the reflection of the mirror, just at the edge of my vision, the shadowy figure was back. This time it was clearer. Tall, thin shape standing just behind me. I quickly turned my head, but again, there was nothing. No one. The hallway was empty. My heart was racing now, my breath shallow as I tried to tell myself that I was being ridiculous. Maybe it was just the way the light shifted, or the way the shadows played tricks on my eyes. But the longer I sat there, the more it felt like I wasn't alone. I started to feel the same unease that I had when I first walked in. The air felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I tried to distract myself, picking up a book from the shelf and flipping through the pages. But my mind wasn't in it. Every time I glanced at the mirror, that same shadowy figure would be there, standing just behind me. The tension kept building, gnawing at me. I knew I couldn't stay much longer. Something about this place felt wrong, like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me. But I couldn't leave just yet. It was getting late, and the roads were winding and dark. I didn't want to drive all the way back to town in the dark, especially not in this state of mind. I decided to go to bed and hoped that a good night's sleep would help me shake off the strange feeling. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a large bed covered in soft blankets. I turned off the lights, crawled under the covers, and tried to relax. But as I lay there in the dark, I could still feel it, the sensation of being watched. The shadowy figure in the mirror was still there in my mind, its presence hanging over me like a storm cloud. I pulled the covers tighter around me, trying to ignore the rising panic in my chest. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the trees outside, felt amplified, like the whole place was alive, watching, waiting. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. I told myself I would sleep through it, that it would pass. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see that shadowy figure standing just behind me in the mirror. And each time, I'd jerk awake, my heart pounding. The night dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I didn't know if it was the isolation or the strange, unsettling feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, but I couldn't stand it anymore. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to grow, wrapping itself around me like a thick fog. Around 3 a.m., I couldn't take it any longer. I threw back the covers and grabbed my phone, using the dim light from the screen to guide me to the hallway. The mirror was still there, reflecting the dim light of the cabin in its glass surface. I took a deep breath, summoning all my courage, and looked into it. There was no shadow. The hallway was empty. But as I stared at the reflection, I couldn't help but feel like there was something in the corner of the room, something watching from the darkness. I had to leave. I couldn't stay there another night. I grabbed my things, packed up as quickly as I could, and opened the door. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. The drive down the mountain felt long, even though it was only a short distance to the nearest town. I didn't stop until I reached a small motel, where I rented a room for the night. The place was run down, and the lights flickered a little, but it didn't matter. It was a place to be, a place to feel safe. I couldn't explain what happened at that cabin. There were no ghost stories or weird noises. It wasn't some supernatural force haunting the place. But whatever it was, whatever I felt in that cabin, it was real. I don't know if it was my imagination or if the isolation and silence just messed with my mind, but I couldn't stay there. I don't think I'll ever be able to go back to that cabin, no matter how perfect the reviews might be. The shadow in the mirror wasn't a trick of the light. It was something else, something I don't understand. But I do know this. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, like someone or something was waiting for me to let my guard down. And maybe that's the scariest part. I don't think I'll ever know for sure if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if there was something truly wrong with that place. I had been planning this solo trip for a while. It wasn't a long one, just a weekend getaway to get away from the daily grind, clear my head, and do a bit of soul searching. I didn't want to stay in a hotel. The idea of staying in an Airbnb seemed perfect. Something more personal, something quieter, a bit off the beaten path. So, I spent hours scrolling through listings, looking for the ideal place. Finally, I found an apartment in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city center. The reviews were great, the price was right, and the place looked cozy, just what I needed. The host was friendly enough in his messages, and everything about it felt safe and secure. I booked it and counted down the days. The first evening, there was exactly what I had hoped for. The apartment was small, but charming. The windows looked out onto tree-lined streets. Everything was clean, neat, and well-kept. There was a small kitchen, a comfortable couch, and a bed covered in soft, white linens. It was the perfect escape from the usual chaos of my life. The only sound I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car driving by outside. It was peaceful. That night, I slept like a rock. No weird noises, no strange disturbances. I woke up the next morning refreshed and excited to explore. I spent the day walking around, checking out local shops, cafes, and parks. The city was just vibrant enough to feel alive, but calm enough to be relaxing. It felt like the ideal place to be, and I couldn't have asked for a better start to my trip. But that night, things started to feel off. I went to bed around 11 p.m., ready to get a full night's sleep. The apartment was quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of the city. I fell asleep quickly, but I woke up suddenly at exactly 3 a.m. I'm not sure why, but I felt restless, like I was being watched. I lay there for a moment, just trying to shake off the feeling. Then I heard it. At first, it was faint, a soft creak, like someone walking down a hallway. I thought it was the neighbors, maybe someone moving around in the apartment complex. It didn't seem like much, and I was too tired to care. But then it happened again. Footsteps, this time louder, more distinct. The kind of soft but deliberate steps that make you freeze for a second. They were coming from the hallway just outside my door. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I strained my ears, listening carefully. The footsteps came again. They weren't hurried, but they were consistent, almost rhythmic. I could hear them clearly, one step after another. They sounded like someone walking slowly, like they were trying to be quiet but were still heavy-footed. I got up and peered through the peephole of the door. There was no one in the hallway. Nothing. Confused, I shrugged it off, assuming it was the neighbors. Maybe someone had gotten up for a late-night snack or was doing something around the house. It was a thin apartment complex, after all, and sounds often carried. I went back to bed, tried to calm my mind, and eventually fell back asleep. The next night, it happened again. Exactly 3 a.m. The footsteps. At first, it was soft, barely audible. Then it grew louder, heavier. I got up and opened the door, hoping to catch whoever was walking around. But there was nothing. No one in the hallway. I went to the window, looked down at the street, but everything was calm. No sign of anyone. Just silence. I felt uneasy but told myself it was probably just the building settling. Maybe there were strange noises in old apartments, right? I was in a neighborhood full of older homes and buildings, so it could have been something creaking or shifting with the temperature. I tried to convince myself of that as I lay back in bed, but my mind wouldn't let go of it. It kept replaying those footsteps, the way they echoed in the hallway, so distinct and deliberate. On the third night, the footsteps came again. But this time, I noticed something different. There were whispers, faint but unmistakable. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the low murmur of voices, almost like a conversation. I felt my pulse quicken as I listened. The whispers were coming from the same place as the footsteps, just outside my door. I held my breath, straining to hear more, but the whispers faded as quickly as they started. The footsteps, however, kept going. Step after step, slow, deliberate, the sound growing more and more unsettling. I tried to ignore it, telling myself again that it was probably nothing. The building was old after all, and sometimes noises could just happen. But the whispers, the footsteps, it didn't make sense. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Was I imagining it? Or was something really going on here? The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling. I'd barely gotten any sleep, and the restlessness was wearing me down. I decided to call the host. Maybe he could offer some explanation. I asked him if anyone else was staying in the building, maybe someone who was making noise at night. He sounded genuinely surprised and said no one else was staying there. No guests, no roommates, nothing. I asked if he was sure, and he said he was, and I could tell he was sincere. But somehow that didn't make me feel any better. If there was no one else in the building, then who was making the footsteps? who was whispering outside my door. I thought about leaving. I thought about packing up, finding a hotel, and forgetting this place ever existed. But I didn't. I stayed another night, hoping that maybe it was just a fluke, that the weird sounds would stop. I tried to push it all out of my head, tell myself it was all in my imagination. But when I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. that night, the footsteps were there again. The next night, I left. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things in the middle of the night, barely even bothering to check out properly, just leaving the keys on the counter and heading out into the cool, dark night. I didn't care that I hadn't gotten the experience I wanted. I just needed to get out. Even now, after I've long left that place behind, I still don't know what I heard. I don't know what those footsteps were, or those whispers that came with them. I don't know if it was just the building, or if it was something else entirely. But whatever it was, it made me feel like I was losing my mind. It's like I could never fully grasp it, no matter how hard I tried to explain it away. And to this day, I haven't stayed in another Airbnb since. Maybe it's because I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't just hearing things. Maybe I'll never know the truth. But I do know one thing for sure. I'm never going back there. Not ever. It was supposed to be a simple, relaxing weekend getaway. Just me, some fresh air, and a chance to unwind away from the constant buzz of city life. I'd been staring at my computer screen for weeks on end, deadlines piling up. So when I found this little countryside house on Airbnb, I thought it was the perfect opportunity. It was tucked away in a small town, miles from anything, nestled at the foot of rolling hills, surrounded by trees and open fields. The pictures on the listing were picturesque. Charming old farmhouse with whitewashed walls, green shutters, and a porch swing swaying in the breeze. The reviews were glowing, with nothing but praise about how peaceful the place was and how welcoming the host, Eric, had been. Everyone mentioned how quiet it was, how you could hear nothing but the wind and birds. That sounded perfect. I packed my bags and left on a Friday afternoon, eager to leave the stress behind. The drive was longer than I expected, about 3 hours, but it was all part of the escape. I passed small towns and wide, empty roads that led to nowhere, the landscape growing more and more serene as I got farther from the city. When I finally turned onto the long gravel driveway, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. This was exactly what I needed. Eric was there to greet me as I pulled up. He was older, in his mid-50s, dressed in an old flannel shirt and jeans, with a scruffy beard and weathered skin. He smiled warmly, waved me over, and led me inside. The house was exactly like the pictures. Charming, cozy, a little rustic, but it had a homey feel. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh bread, and the fireplace in the living room was already crackling with a small fire. He offered me some coffee, and we chatted for a bit. He was polite, friendly, but there was something about him that seemed a bit off. Nothing specific, just a vague feeling that I couldn't quite shake. After a quick tour of the house, he showed me where I'd be staying. The basement. "We've got a nice, quiet room down there," Eric said. "It's a bit cooler, but people usually love it. It's perfect for sleeping in the heat of the summer." I didn't think much of it at first. He seemed sincere, and the room sounded like it would be quiet, maybe a little secluded. Ideal for someone wanting peace and quiet. He handed me the key to the basement door, and I made my way down the narrow staircase. The steps creaked under my weight as I descended into the dimly lit basement. It wasn't as inviting as the rest of the house. The air down here felt thick, almost musty. There was no window to let in natural light, just a single bulb hanging overhead, casting long shadows across the room. The space was smaller than I expected, but it was furnished. An old mattress in the corner, covered with faded sheets. The mattress looked worn, like it had been there for years. The carpet had a strange stain near the foot of the bed, which I immediately tried to ignore. I didn't want to dwell on it, and honestly, I didn't feel like being picky. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't what I expected. But at least it was quiet. Too quiet, in fact. I put my bags down, unpacked a little, and set myself up for the night. The rest of the house was warm, but down here in the basement it was colder, even with the blankets on the bed. I brushed it off, thinking I'd get used to it. After all, I was here to relax, not overthink things. I headed upstairs for dinner, and Eric and I ate in the cozy kitchen. He made a simple meal of stew and bread, and we talked a little more, mostly about the area. The conversation was fine, but there was a lingering oddness in the air. Nothing overt, but a subtle discomfort that settled in the pit of my stomach. By the time I went to bed, the sun had set, and the house had that still, quiet feeling to it. I lay there in the basement, under the thin covers, staring at the low ceiling. The mattress sagged beneath me, and the cold air wrapped around my body like a tight embrace. I kept hearing small noises, a creak here, a tap there, but it wasn't anything unusual. I told myself it was just the house settling, the wind, or the old pipes making noise. I closed my eyes, trying to push the unease away. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. Slow, heavy footsteps. It wasn't like the usual creaks from the house. It was the unmistakable sound of someone walking. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest as I lay there, trying to listen more closely. The footsteps were methodical, deliberate, as if someone was pacing upstairs. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, or maybe it was Eric moving around. But I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just a creak or a shift in the house's foundation. It was footsteps, clear, distinct, and too heavy to be anything else. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of the silence around me, pressing down on me. It was as if the air had thickened even more. The footsteps continued for a while, then stopped, only to start up again moments later. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I finally got up and went to the door of the basement, slowly turning the handle and creeping up the stairs. The house was eerily quiet now, the footsteps having stopped just before I reached the top of the stairs. I checked the hallway empty. The door to the kitchen was slightly ajar, but no one was there. The lights in the living room were off, and there was no sign of Eric. I stood there, my heart thumping in my chest, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the house, settling like I told myself earlier. Maybe I was overreacting. I went back to the basement and tried to sleep, but every creak, every noise, made my heart race again. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. My mind kept replaying the sound of those footsteps, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. The next morning, I went upstairs for breakfast. Eric was already up, sitting at the table, sipping his coffee. He didn't seem bothered, but I could feel the unease still clinging to me. I wasn't sure how to bring it up. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I had to know. Is anyone else here? I asked carefully, trying to keep my voice casual. Eric looked at me, surprised. "No, I live alone," he said, his brow furrowed. "Why do you ask?" I felt a chill run down my spine. The house was quiet, but something about his response made me uneasy. I had heard those footsteps. I had heard them clear as day. There was no way I was imagining it. I smiled awkwardly, trying to cover up the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. I didn't want to make Eric uncomfortable, but I couldn't stay another night. I had to leave. There was something off about that basement, about the way the house felt, and I didn't feel safe anymore. Not with the sounds I had heard, not with the way the house seemed to breathe around me. I told Eric that I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave early. He didn't press me on it, and I was thankful for that. He was polite, though his eyes held a trace of confusion. I grabbed my things, hurried to the car, and left. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been wrong with that house, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't a ghost, no strange supernatural event. It was just a feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was lurking in the quiet spaces, something I couldn't see but could feel. It wasn't right. I didn't want to think about it too much. I just wanted to get back to normal, to the noise and busyness of the city where things made sense. But I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had stayed longer, if I had pushed through the discomfort. Something told me I was better off leaving when I did. I haven't looked at Airbnb the same way since. Every time I see a listing for a cozy, quiet getaway, I remember that basement, and I remember the footsteps that didn't belong to anyone. I had been on the road for hours, cruising down endless stretches of highway. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and I was starting to feel the weight of the drive. My shoulders were stiff, my eyes heavy, but I knew I was close. My reservation was for an Airbnb just a few miles off the highway, and I couldn't wait to rest after a long day. The place looked perfect in the photos. A modern cabin with sleek lines, minimalist furniture, and big windows that overlooked what seemed like miles of open land. The host's reviews were glowing, everyone raving about the spot's cleanliness and how welcoming it felt. I'd been on the road for a while, and my last few stops had been less than ideal, so this place seemed like a perfect respite. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I felt a sense of relief. It looked just like the pictures. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow across the neatly landscaped yard. There was nothing particularly remarkable about the place, but it was just right. I was so ready to unwind. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat, stretched, and walked to the front door. The key was hidden in the usual spot, under a small rock, and I let myself in. The first thing that hit me when I stepped inside was the smell. At first, I thought it was just a mix of mustiness from the cabin sitting empty, maybe even something from a previous guest. But the smell, something sour like spoiled food, immediately made me feel uneasy. It wasn't overpowering at first, just faint, but I noticed it immediately. I shrugged it off as a minor issue, figuring it would air out once I opened some windows. After all, this place looked so clean, so pristine, that the smell had to be a temporary thing, right? I set my bag down and started to take in the surroundings. The living room had a big sectional sofa, a coffee table, and a huge flat-screen TV on the wall. The walls were painted in soft gray tones, and the floors were a smooth, polished wood. It looked just like a hotel, but with the comfort of a home. Everything seemed in place except for that smell. I went to the kitchen, hoping the smell might be coming from something in the trash or fridge. But when I opened the fridge door, there was nothing in it. Just a few bottles of water and some half-empty condiment jars, nothing that should have been causing a stench. The trash was empty, and there were no signs of anything that could be contributing to the odor. I thought maybe the housekeeper had missed something, a spill in a cabinet or under the sink. I went ahead and opened every window in the place, hoping the breeze would help clear out whatever was lingering. But even after the fresh air began flowing through, the smell didn't seem to dissipate. It only seemed to get worse. It was subtle at first, but over time, I could feel it gnawing at me. I thought maybe I was just overtired. Maybe my senses were out of whack from being on the road for so long. But the longer I stayed in the place, the more the smell seemed to seep into everything. The walls, the furniture, the very air I was breathing. By the time I settled into the bedroom, I started to feel uneasy. I tried to ignore it, but every time I moved, it felt like the sourness was just there. I couldn't escape it. I pulled the sheets back and climbed into bed, figuring that maybe I just needed a good night's sleep to reset my mind. But as I lay there in the quiet of the room, I began hearing something. Faint whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, the house settling, or maybe the hum of a nearby appliance. But it wasn't just a creaking or a breeze. It was too rhythmic, almost too intentional. It was as though someone was talking in the distance, but I couldn't make out the words. It was a low, indistinct murmur, like voices just out of reach. I sat up, straining to listen. I thought maybe it was coming from outside, maybe some animals or people from a nearby property. But when I opened the door to the hallway and listened, the whispering didn't stop. It was coming from within the house. I felt my heart rate spike. This was ridiculous. I was just imagining things, right? I walked to the living room, the sound of my feet echoing off the hardwood floors. The whispers faded when I moved, but I could still feel them lingering in the air, like they were following me. I went back to the kitchen and opened all the windows again, hoping that the fresh air might clear my mind and let me sleep. But even with all the windows open, the smell and the whispers wouldn't leave. They clung to the house like it was part of its bones. By midnight, I was on edge. I had tried to watch TV, read, and just ignore the growing sense of unease that was settling into my chest, but nothing worked. The whispers got louder, and the smell. It had grown so strong that it was almost suffocating. I could feel it in my clothes, in my hair, in my lungs. I had to leave. I grabbed my things and tossed them into the car as quickly as I could. The air outside was cool, and for a brief moment, I felt relief, like I was finally escaping whatever had gripped that place. I got into the car, slammed the door shut, and drove off into the night, my heart racing. I had no plan. I just needed to get away. The road ahead was empty, and all I wanted was to be far, far away from that house. The hours slipped by as I drove. I didn't care about where I was going, just that I needed to keep moving. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but I knew I couldn't go back. I ended up driving all night, the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness like a thin beam of light in a vast void. I eventually pulled into a rest stop in the early morning hours, exhausted and running on fumes. I sat there for a while, staring out at the empty lot, the silence around me almost deafening. I was finally away from that place, but the smell was still with me. It clung to my clothes, to my skin, and I could almost taste it at the back of my throat. Couldn't shake it. The next morning, I contacted the host. I told them everything about the smell, the whispers, the unease that I couldn't explain. They apologized profusely and immediately refunded me for the stay. But even after they refunded me, even after I got home and washed my clothes multiple times, the smell lingered. It was faint, but it wouldn't completely leave. It was in my jacket, my shoes, the duffel bag I'd used to pack my things. It was like the place had seeped into everything I owned, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. I never returned to that Airbnb. The smell eventually faded, but the unease I felt during those hours in that house stayed with me, creeping into my thoughts at odd moments. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to the experience than just a bad night in a strange place. Maybe it was all just in my head, but whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. I would never set foot in that house again. It wasn't just the smell. It wasn't just the whispers. It was the feeling that I was never truly alone, even in a house that looked perfect at first. Something about that place felt wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. And that, more than anything, was what haunted me long after I left. I pulled up to the apartment building at exactly 6:30 p.m. The city had been bustling all day, but now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the streets had quieted down a bit. The building itself was impressive, an old, renovated brownstone, with its tall, narrow windows and freshly painted iron railings. It looked like one of those places you'd see in a magazine or in a movie about people who have their lives together. The kind of place you might imagine yourself staying in for a weekend getaway, just to feel fancy for a couple of nights. And this was exactly what I was doing, staying for 2 nights while I attended a conference in the city. I had booked the place through Airbnb. The host, Jason, had seemed friendly enough in our online messages. His profile said he'd been hosting for several years, and his reviews were glowing. Most people praised him for his hospitality, mentioning how he made them feel like they were staying at a 5-star hotel. It all seemed perfect. The apartment was spotless, beautifully decorated, and, according to the photos, spacious. I thought I'd struck gold. When I arrived at the building, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. The lobby was small but elegant, with polished wood floors and a few high-end pieces of furniture. It felt a little too quiet, almost like no one lived here. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she could have been in her 50s, smiled at me but didn't say anything. She just gestured toward the elevator, and I stepped inside, wondering why I didn't hear any noise or laughter coming from other tenants or guests. Jason was waiting for me when I stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor. He looked exactly like his profile pictures, tall, slim, with short, dark hair and a clean-shaven face. He wore a black button-up shirt and jeans, and as he smiled at me, I almost felt like I was about to meet a celebrity. There was something about his presence that made me feel instantly at ease. "Welcome," he said with a warmth that seemed to reach me from across the room. "I hope the journey wasn't too tiring." "No, it was fine, just a little long," I replied, feeling oddly comfortable with him. It was like he had this way of making you feel like you'd known him for years, even though we were strangers. He took my bag and led me down the hallway toward the apartment. He was chatty, talking about how he had been hosting for a long time, how the place had been booked back-to-back for months. "It's always a pleasure to have guests," he said with a soft laugh. "You meet such interesting people. I love hearing their stories." We reached the door to the apartment, and Jason unlocked it with a smile. "Here we are," he said as he swung the door open. The apartment was stunning. It had high ceilings, a modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances, and large windows that looked out over the city. Everything was pristine, with contemporary furniture arranged in a way that made the place feel both cozy and elegant. There was a slight scent of fresh flowers in the air, and soft music played in the background. Classical, but not too loud. It almost felt like a hotel room, but better, more personal. Jason gave me a brief tour of the place, showing me where everything was. "You have a fully stocked fridge, and the bathroom has fresh towels and toiletries. Feel free to help yourself to anything." He paused, and then with a small smile added, "I like to treat my guests well." As he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, but there was something about his overly rehearsed politeness that made me uncomfortable. His words sounded so scripted. He mentioned several times how busy he had been with bookings, how many guests he had hosted, and how he always made sure everyone had everything they needed. It was almost like he was trying too hard to make a good impression, but I didn't want to overthink it. Maybe I was just being paranoid after a long day of traveling. I thanked him for the tour and asked if I could settle in. "Of course. Please make yourself at home," he said, stepping back out into the hallway. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'll be around." I watched him leave, feeling relieved to finally have some space to myself. I unpacked my bags and wandered around the apartment a bit more, admiring the decor. But no matter how hard I tried to relax, the feeling of unease lingered at the back of my mind. That night, after a quick dinner, I went to bed early. I hadn't realized how tired I was until I lay down in the soft, white sheets. The bed was comfortable, and I soon found myself drifting off to sleep. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to strange noises coming from the hallway. At first, it was faint, almost like a tapping sound. It was so quiet that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. A faint rhythmic sound, like someone was pacing back and forth. I listened, straining to hear over the hum of the air conditioning. The sound seemed to be coming closer. My heart started to race. I tried to brush it off as nothing, maybe someone on the other side of the building, but the pacing continued. The floorboards creaked, and I could hear the faint sound of someone's shoes tapping on the hard wood. I got out of bed, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I couldn't ignore it. I tiptoed across the room and stood by the door, peeking through the peephole. What I saw made my stomach drop. Jason was standing in the hallway, facing my door. He was staring directly at it, as if he knew I was watching him. His expression was blank, almost emotionless. It wasn't like he was waiting for something, he was just standing there, completely still, staring. The longer I looked, the more I felt like I couldn't breathe. I stepped back from the door, heart racing, my mind trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but the pacing didn't stop. It went on for what felt like hours. I lay back down, unable to close my eyes, too scared to move or even make a sound. I thought about texting someone, anyone, but my phone felt miles away on the nightstand. I was paralyzed. Finally, just before dawn, the pacing stopped. The hallway fell silent again. I didn't dare open the door to check. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. When the sun began to rise, I heard Jason's footsteps in the hallway again, as if nothing had happened. He knocked gently on my door around 8 a.m. "Good morning. I hope you had a restful night," he said cheerfully when I opened the door. His smile was the same as before. Polite, professional, almost too perfect. Yeah. I managed to reply, my voice shaky. Everything's fine. Great, he said with a quick nod. I've got a full day of work ahead, but if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. He turned to leave but then stopped, glancing back at me with a strange look in his eyes. Have a great day, he said, and then walked away. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The night before felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape, but the way Jason acted made me question my own sanity. Was it all in my head? Was I just overthinking it? I packed my things quickly, eager to get out of the apartment. I didn't want to stay another night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense that Jason knew something I didn't. The apartment had felt safe and welcoming at first, but now it felt like a trap. A place where someone could monitor your every move without you even realizing it. As I checked out, Jason gave me another warm smile. I hope to host you again sometime, he said, but I could barely make eye contact with him as I quickly left the apartment. I don't think I'll ever stay in another Airbnb again. To this day, I wonder if Jason was really just a nice host, or if something darker was lurking beneath that smile. I never got the chance to find out, and I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that something didn't feel right, and I'll never forget the way he stood there in the hallway, watching me while I tried to sleep. I don't know if he was just being strange or if I was just another part of a much darker story. I don't want to know, but I left that place and I never looked back. I've always trusted Airbnb. I've stayed in places across the country, cozy apartments in cities, countryside cottages, and even a few tree houses. Every time it felt like a great experience. The app had always been my go-to for finding a comfortable, affordable place to stay when I needed a break or a new adventure. I'd never had a problem. That all changed after one particular stay. Started off like any other trip. I'd booked a 2-bedroom apartment in a nice, quiet neighborhood. The photos on the listing were lovely. The apartment looked clean and modern, with big windows that let in plenty of natural light. It was the kind of place that looked perfect for a weekend getaway. The host had a decent rating, and there were no red flags in the reviews. Everyone had positive things to say. I thought, what could go wrong? When I arrived, the place looked even better than the photos. The living room was spacious, with a plush couch and a flat-screen TV. The kitchen had all the appliances I could need. There was even a little dining nook by the window, which was nice. I was only going to be there for 2 nights, so I didn't waste any time unpacking and settling in. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined streets, the hum of distant traffic, the occasional dog barking in the distance. Felt peaceful, safe. I was looking forward to a relaxing few days. I decided to take a shower right away. After the long drive, it felt good to finally unwind. The bathroom was nice, with clean white tiles and a big mirror above the sink. The shower had great water pressure, and everything was just as expected. I stepped out, grabbed the towel, and started drying off. As I ran the towel across my face, something caught my eye. It was a small red light blinking faintly on the edge of the bathroom mirror frame. At first, I thought it was just a reflection of something outside or maybe a light coming from another part of the apartment. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a reflection. It was a camera, small, discreet, and hidden in plain sight. It was barely noticeable, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. My heart began to race. My first thought was, no, this can't be right. It's just a weird coincidence. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I turned around and looked around the bathroom. There were no other obvious cameras, just the one by the mirror. But that didn't sit right with me. I quickly dried off, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced. Could it be some kind of accident? A mistake on the part of the host? Or worse, was I being watched? I stepped out of the bathroom and into the living room, trying to stay calm. I couldn't shake the image of the camera in the mirror. I had to know if there were more cameras. I started scanning the apartment, feeling paranoid with every glance. I moved toward the bedroom, checking behind the curtains, under the furniture, and around the room. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I had a feeling. And then I saw it. In the corner of the ceiling, near the edge where the walls met, was another small camera. This one was even more obvious. It was positioned in a way that made it hard to miss if you were paying attention. My breath caught in my throat. I was no longer in denial. I wasn't just imagining things. There were cameras in this apartment. I felt violated. My mind started racing through all the worst scenarios. Who else had seen me? Had they been watching me the entire time? The idea that someone had been watching me without my knowledge, in my most private moments, made my skin crawl. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to leave, to get out of that apartment as quickly as possible. But I needed to get my stuff together. I quickly grabbed my bag and started packing. I didn't want to touch anything in the apartment, didn't want to stay there for another second. Every second felt like a lifetime. My hands shook as I stuffed clothes into my bag. I couldn't think straight. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I grabbed my phone and snapped a quick picture of the camera in the ceiling. I knew I needed evidence, something to show when I reported it. I checked the front door to make sure it was unlocked. I didn't want to waste time fumbling with keys. I needed to get out. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was going to walk in, or worse, that the cameras were already live, transmitting footage somewhere. Every corner of that apartment now seemed sinister. The calm, peaceful space had turned into something threatening. I practically ran out of the door, closing it softly behind me, not looking back. I made my way down the stairs and out into the street. I didn't care where I went at that point. I just needed to be away from that place. I found a nearby cafe and sat down, trying to calm myself, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I felt sick. I kept thinking about how much of my privacy had been violated. How could someone do this? How could a host do this to a guest? I didn't even want to go back to my car, let alone deal with Airbnb. But I knew I had to report it. I had to let them know what had happened. I opened the app and sent a message to the host. I didn't know what to say at first. I tried to keep it calm, but my anger and fear seeped through. I found hidden cameras in the apartment. I've left and will be reporting this. I hit send and waited for a response. Took a while for the host to get back to me. When they finally did, they apologized profusely, claiming they had no idea about the cameras. They said they would look into it, but I wasn't buying it. I didn't trust them. How could they not know? I didn't believe for a second that they were unaware of what had been going on in their apartment. I knew I had to report it to Airbnb. I felt this overwhelming sense of responsibility to warn others. I didn't want anyone else to go through what I just had. I submitted my complaint through the app, attaching the photo of the camera I'd found. I requested an investigation, asking for action to be taken. My stomach churned as I waited for a response. The next day, Airbnb got back to me. Their response was underwhelming. They apologized for the experience and immediately refunded my money, but they didn't offer any further investigation. No follow-up. No assurance that they would look into the host or the apartment. They simply gave me my money back and wished me well. Couldn't believe it. That was it? A refund? I didn't want the money. I wanted accountability. I wanted someone to take responsibility for what had happened. But it didn't feel like anyone cared. It felt like they were just brushing it off as a small mistake, an isolated incident. I kept thinking about the cameras, how many other guests had stayed there without knowing. How many had been filmed just like me? I felt like my privacy had been stripped away in an instant, and Airbnb's response made it worse. It was as if they didn't take it seriously. I still think about that apartment, about what happened. The experience changed how I look at Airbnb, and I've become far more cautious when booking a place now. I've installed cameras and monitoring systems in my own home to feel safer. Every time I stay in a new place, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that someone might be lurking in the background, hidden behind a camera, just waiting to invade my privacy again. The worst part is the feeling of helplessness. I didn't know who to turn to, and I still don't. I tried to report it to the authorities, but without solid proof that the cameras were actually recording, they told me there wasn't much they could do. It was a violation, yes, but proving anything was nearly impossible. And the worst part is, I never knew if anyone else had gone through what I had. It's been months. but I can't shake the unease that comes with staying in any new place now. Trust is harder to come by. Airbnb had always felt like a safe and easy option for traveling, but after that stay, I couldn't bring myself to trust it the same way again. The violation I felt still lingers, and the absence of any real action on Airbnb's part only makes the situation worse. I'll never be the same after that experience. I'll always check behind mirrors, peek into corners, and double-check every room. I'll never feel fully comfortable in any place again, and that's something Airbnb can never fix. I had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. A cabin tucked away in the woods, miles from the nearest town, no distractions, just what I needed. The photos on the Airbnb listing were exactly what I had in mind. Rustic charm, big windows with forest views, a cozy fireplace, and peace. The kind of peace that would help me disconnect from everything and everyone for a couple of days. I wasn't expecting much else, just the promise of solitude and silence. I arrived late at night, the road leading to the cabin dark and winding. The GPS had barely kept up with the tiny roads, and I had to slow down to navigate the curves. As I drove through the woods, the trees seemed to grow taller and thicker, wrapping around me like a dark tunnel. The air smelled like pine and earth, cool and fresh, a welcome change from the city. When I pulled up to the cabin, the headlights of my car illuminated the front porch. It was exactly as I had imagined. A little too perfect, maybe, but still it looked cozy, exactly what I wanted. The owner had left a key in a lockbox for me, and I found it with no trouble. The instructions had said to let myself in and make myself comfortable, so I did. The door creaked slightly when I pushed it open, but it wasn't anything alarming. In fact, it gave the place a little character. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, with a wood-burning stove in the corner, a few chairs scattered around, and a big, comfortable-looking couch. The kitchen was small but well-equipped, and the bedroom at the far end had a big, inviting bed. Everything was clean, nothing out of place. It felt exactly like what I needed, a simple retreat. I checked the time, midnight, a little later than I had planned to arrive, but that didn't matter. I put my bags down and went about settling in, putting my food in the fridge, getting out my laptop to catch up on emails, even though I wasn't in the mood to really focus on anything. The quiet in the cabin was almost unnerving, though. It wasn't the kind of silence I had hoped for. It felt too still, like something was holding its breath, waiting for something. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just the isolation. I wandered around the cabin, getting familiar with my surroundings. The living room had a large window that looked out into the woods, but the night was too dark to see much beyond the porch light. I turned my attention to the hallway. The cabin was small enough that everything was easy to navigate, but as I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed something odd. There was a door. It was at the far end, opposite the bedroom, and it was locked. I hadn't seen any mention of it in the listing, and I could have sworn it wasn't visible in the photos. Curious, I approached it. The door was made of heavy wood, like the rest of the cabin, and the lock was an old-fashioned brass one. It didn't seem particularly special, but something about it made me uneasy. I couldn't help but wonder why it was locked. There was no mention of a closet or storage space in the cabin. What was behind it? I felt a weird tug at the back of my mind, an instinct telling me to stay away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I spent a few minutes just standing there, staring at the door. Nothing unusual, but still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Shaking off the feeling, I went back to the living room and turned on the TV to distract myself. I had just gotten comfortable on the couch when I heard something. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, a scratching sound. I paused, listening. The noise came again, faint but undeniable. It was coming from behind the door. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling or maybe some animal outside, but the scratching had a certain urgency to it. It didn't sound natural. It didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. I swallowed hard, telling myself to relax. I was in the middle of nowhere, after all. Wild animals were common, right? But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The scratching stopped after a few minutes, But my unease didn't go away. The quiet in the cabin was thick now, like the whole place was holding its breath. I didn't feel alone anymore, but I couldn't figure out why. It was ridiculous. There was no one else here, just me. Yet, the house seemed alive somehow, as if it had its own pulse. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the wood, every snap of a twig outside, made my skin crawl. I stayed up until dawn, keeping one eye on the door. The scratching hadn't returned, but I didn't feel any better. I tried to push it from my mind, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that everything was fine. It was just an old cabin in the woods. That's all. The next morning, I tried to shake off the strange feeling. The air was crisp, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the cabin. I made coffee, got comfortable, and settled in for a lazy day. I had planned to spend the afternoon hiking around, maybe take some photos of the landscape, but something kept pulling me back to that door. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided to ask the owner about it, thinking maybe I was overreacting. I shot off a quick message through the app, asking about the door. His reply came a little later, and when I read it, I felt a knot form in my stomach. He was vague, saying it was just storage and that I didn't need to worry about it. He seemed almost evasive, like he was trying to brush it off. I didn't press further. I told myself it was nothing, just a storage closet or something mundane. But the way he said it, "Don't worry about it," didn't sit right with me. I decided to take a walk. I needed some fresh air. As I stepped outside, the woods around me were peaceful, but there was that nagging feeling again, like someone was watching. I took in the scenery, the sound of the wind in the trees, the crunch of leaves underfoot, but I couldn't fully enjoy it. That door was still in my mind. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. The day passed slowly, and I spent most of it trying to distract myself. I did some light reading, explored the area around the cabin, but the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went to bed early that night, but sleep didn't come easy. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound. It was back, the scratching. This time it was louder, more insistent. It sounded like nails dragging across the wood, scratching, scraping. It wasn't just a random noise anymore. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there in the dark, wide awake, trying to make sense of it. The sound came from the door again. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. It was so real, so unnervingly close. I wanted to get up, check it out, but my body wouldn't move. My mind was racing. What could it be? What if it was some wild animal trying to get in? Or worse, what if there was someone else in the cabin? I stayed frozen in bed, staring at the door, waiting for the sound to stop. It went on for what felt like an eternity, and then, just as abruptly as it had started, the scratching ceased. The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't bring myself to. I just stayed there, wide-eyed, listening for any other sounds. But there was nothing. It was as if the cabin had returned to its unnatural stillness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the door in my mind, the scratching echoing in my ears. When the first light of dawn finally crept through the windows, I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my things, packed up, and left the cabin without a second thought. When I left, the door was still there, locked and silent, but it didn't matter. I was done. I never contacted the owner again, and I didn't tell him what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to. I didn't need to. The feeling in my gut told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't welcome there. Something was hiding behind that door, and I had no intention of finding out what. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't look at the cabin for long. I was too scared of what I might see. I haven't gone back to that place, and I don't think I ever will. Some things are better left undisturbed. Some doors are better left locked.